So it's been a while since we've been together at the Y. I'm very happy to be back. Hi, gang.
Hi, Jordan.
Happy Hanukkah, Mary.
Happy Hanukkah to you, too.
So, let's start with Harvey. Harvey likes to be called Mary. So if you'd like to...
Well, likes to. That's like saying, you know, I like to walk.
Do you?
Yeah.
All right. So 1982, back.
Yeah.
You became a star at the Helen Hayes in Song Trilogy.
I guess.
You know. It's
Yeah,
written,
but you know, I only let the show move to Broadway so it would close.
How'd that
No,
go?
well, because the show was we did it at the Richard Allen Center where we couldn't give tickets away, and we played to empty houses, and then Mel Gussow and Rex Reed published on the same day, and oh my God! And all of a sudden, people were walking the 5 flights of stairs in the 6th floor theater. So then we moved off Broadway to the Actors Playhouse, and it became such a big hit there that I said, I'll never get out of this thing. We were like sold out for months in advance, and they said, let's move it to Broadway. I went, great. I'll get a Broadway credit, which would look good on the resume, and the show will close.
How'd that go?
The best laid plans of drag queens and didn't work out that way. Yeah, it didn't work out that way.
So, but now, 36 years later, back at the Hayes with Torch Song, what is that like? I mean, I assume there's part of it that feels homecoming, but part of it that's more complicated than that.
No. It does, I mean, very much feels homecoming because the theater, I mean, I spent 3 years of my life in that theater and lots of complicated things happened in that theater that had nothing to do with Torch Song. Other parts of my life were spent in that theater when it was the David Frost show and stuff like that. Things happen, and so there's a lot of stuff tied in with it. But to go back there and to see Torch Song on that stage again, it's, you know, to see them do it. I mean, and I'm so proud of them, and they know it. They're like sick of hearing me say it. Well, he's not sick of hearing me. Nope. But I am. I'm very proud of them. They do this gorgeous job, and they make me so proud. But to watch the audience is what really changed. When we did Torch Song originally, the audience was 95% heterosexual or gay people hiding. They didn't actually walk into the theater proudly that they were seeing Torch Song. They wasn't scared, as Arnold would say. They wasn't scared. And I talk about there was a cartoon in, I think it was in Playboy, when the movie came out, of a triplex movie theater that was showing Tequila Sunrise and Terminator 2 and Torch Song, and the cartoon was 2 guys, and one said to the other, "I'm not getting on that line. They'll think I'm gay." And that's what it was like back then. Yeah. Now you go to the theater and there's gay people proudly sitting in the audience. There's heterosexuals too, but
few and far between.
Well, you're not allowed to discriminate. You know, that's what they tell me. They tell me there's a law. Fine. So you have straight people and gay people, but you see the gay people reacting in such a free way, and you hear them, especially in the scenes between the 2 of them. You hear them. They can tell you. The audience is as much of a character in the play as the 2 of you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, talk.
A supporting character.
Yeah. So that's the big thing that's changed for me. And I sit in the back and I say, you know, this has changed. The sad thing is, the reason to do the play hasn't changed. Well, I don't know if that's sad. You come into the world who you are, and you need to figure that out. You need to live to figure out who you are. And your parents, as wonderful as they could be, they still had an idea of who you were going to be. And you don't necessarily turn out. So that struggle is there no matter what, right? It's there no matter what. So Torch Song just talks about those struggles. You know, it's so there's just as much reason to be as ever.
Yeah. Michael, you don't normally have in the rehearsal room with you the person who originated the role as you were finding your own way through it. So what was that like?
Well, it was at once very intimidating, of course, because he mastered what I was working on. He had already, conquered the mountain I was learning how to climb, and that's a scary idea. That I'm over here failing left and right, and that guy already did it, and he wrote it, and I want not only to make him proud, but I want to impress him. I want him to be glad he chose me and proud of me. So it was complicated, and he would always show up at rehearsal like magic, like out of thin air. He would be in the middle of something and we'd hear, "Mary!" from around the corner. And I'm like, oh, I started to think he was always there. And maybe he was always there. But it was also, from the very beginning of this adventure, he's had my back. I mean, from the very beginning, he has been there 100% and stood aside at the same time, if that makes sense. He hasn't tried to, any suggestion he's given has been with, but you do what you need to do, and every idea has been, that worked for me, it might not work for you. And sometimes his ideas blow it wide open for me, and suddenly something makes sense. Sometimes they're very simple, sometimes they're very specific.
Can you give us one of those ideas?
Well,
that blew it open?
For example, there was when we were first rehearsing Off Broadway, the relationship between my character and Ed, who is the on-again, off-again lover, through the entire, nearly 10-year story, it's a very complicated relationship, and Ed does things to Arnold that are very painful. And one day in rehearsal, I just thought, why do I keep going back to this guy, or why do I love this guy? Basically, why? Why him? How do I sustain this relationship over a 10-year story? Why him? And I asked Harvey, and he said, because he let you, which is a line in the play. I say that, somebody asked me, why did you love him? And I say, because he let me. And it was a very simple answer, because he let you. And it's in the play, I heard it, I said it in rehearsal, but I'd never really thought about it until he said that. And the idea that a person like Arnold at that time, who just wanted to love somebody, and everybody that he tried to love wouldn't allow it for whatever reason. But here comes this guy who's impossible. It'll never happen. It can't work. It can't work. Yet he allows this man to love him. It blew it wide open for me, and I realized that, of course he has to go back to him. He has to keep letting him in. He has to, let him sleep on the couch in the third act, and that was so simple. It was a text, I think. I think I asked him, and he said it in a text, and then I lay awake all night, rethinking everything. That was a big one. A little one was when you get penetrated in the back room scene, crush the beer can. Urie! And it's a big laugh.
I don't think I ever did that, though.
Really?
Yeah.
That was just an idea that you had for me?
I didn't do that.
Are you pissed that you didn't have that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could turn back.
Speaking of which.
Just laughing about that song.
But
yeah,
he also...
No, it was, but what's right for him is different, Actually, what I said to him was, I said, I watched you in the backroom scene, and, excuse my language, you get fucked like somebody who's never gotten fucked. You're a top and not a bottom, and it's time you learn to bottom.
Can anybody tell me if this is the first time that sentence has been said on the stage tonight? Why?
Well, you know,
I'm guessing maybe.
He just bent over and then just started dancing. It's like, hurts a little.
So then he showed me.
That was the excuse.
And scene. Well played.
Ask Mercedes
I'm
something.
Mercedes.
I am the sole vagina.
Is that the first time that's been said on stage in 1972? I feel like we're making history here. That's the best line. So I want to talk a little bit about parts that brought you to Torch Song. So 3 out of the last 4 Broadway outings for you have been widows. Anyone name them? Rose Tattoo, American Plan, now Torch Song. And you know, the other 4, the fourth, your husband went with a goat, but he was still alive. So we won't count that. So I'm interested in what is it about widowhood that is such rich drama to dig into in such different ways?
Oh, I never thought of it that way. Well, they're each very different widows. There is certainly there's a sadness, a tristesse to each one of the characters, but very different. But there's a certain freedom and a newfound profound loneliness. When you've been married or in a partnership for a couple of decades and suddenly that person is gone, you have to reinvent your life. And grief itself is, it's a long thing. I mean, people who've lost partners, whom I know, it's taken fully 4 years before they could come up for air from this rolling grief that no matter how prepared you are for it, it just takes you by the throat, you know? And I've talked to both men who have lost their partners, their husbands, and women who have lost their husbands. And it's shocking when you say, "How are you?" And they just say, "Bad, real bad. It's awful. And there's no end in sight, and I can't go around it, I can't go under it, I've got to go right through it, and I don't know how long it's going to last, and it's bad." So I think that's, you know, you survive that, you come out of the end of that tunnel, you're a different person. And in a way, each one of these roles was about a woman who is, you know, just emerging from that. So I myself wonder about old Ma. Her husband has been gone for 3 or 4 years, and she's living down in Miami Beach, and it's way before online dating, so she's not meeting anyone. And there is this, and this happens a lot, I'm sure, this refocusing on the child. Often to the child's, you know, astounded, you know, sort of back off woman kind of feeling. So that's what happens to us. And there's so much love there, but there's also this enormous moral, from the mother's point of view, question about what's going on. And so I have to use these as-ifs, because 20 years later, now we're more than that, 30 since it was first went up. It's a different climate.
40.
40?
I finished writing in 1978.
Shit.
40 years.
Wow. Wow.
I was 6. A child bride.
And when we talk about that, the different climate, it's not just the social and political context, it's also the context of theater. So when Torch Song first played, it was really the first gay play, yes, that was a big commercial Broadway success, but also, for many, the first play in which the main character celebrated his gayness instead of feeling crushed by it. And Michael, I've been in thinking about, you've played many different gay characters, most of them on that positive side of self-identity. And I'm curious if you can, from having explored those different people, find for us a common thread among them that allows for that self-reflection in a positive way.
That's great. I mean, when I think specifically about this guy and the character I played on Ugly Betty and the character I played in The Temperamentals, which is a play that your mom produced, who's here, the wonderful Daryl Roth, who produced that, which was really the first play I did in New York. The first, the sort of like thing I did in New York. Those three guys specifically had to escape something. For Arnold, and I shouldn't say escape something. I should say get out from under something. For Arnold, in many ways it was his mom, but it was also he couldn't pretend to be somebody else. He wouldn't try to pass. He wouldn't, and because what he needed to be was larger than life and way beyond any kind of pretense. And the same was true for my character on Ugly Betty, Mark, who also had a mother, an overbearing mother who did not know, who unlike this story, did not know that he was gay because she was blind and deaf. But he had to, and he too was out and proud. Rudy Gernreich, who I played, who was a real guy, who was based on a real person, he had to escape. He had to escape Austria during the World War II. So and then he had to, and so from that, I believe, caused him to be a fighter and to join a group of men who started the Mattachine Society. That was the first political organization for gay people in the early 50s. But he ended up having to take himself out of it in order to pursue a career in, wait for it, fashion. in the mid-50s, he couldn't be gay and do that. But I think all of them had to get out from underneath something to wear their pride. And I think that is perhaps the thing that those three have in common. And others other characters that I played that have had, well, this is interesting because I thought about this recently actually, because I think that there is still shame, shame for gay people. We still carry shame. Not all of us, but some of us do. And I think that Arnold, as proud as he is, still has shame. And perhaps that is the real thing that goes through all the characters, even the ones who aren't proud, even the gay characters I've played that aren't necessarily proud or out or larger than life, that they all have a shame that they're trying to overcome or suppress or, I think overcome or suppress. And I think that is the thing I've learned the most, because I carry shame. I'm from Texas, I'm not ashamed of that, but like, I mean, I am, but that's, that was, I grew up in a society where men were men, and then I came to New York, and that's still part of it. I mean, that's still in me, and I remember meeting this guy who is a friend of mine, who was a good friend of mine who's Norwegian. And his friend joined us for dinner in the middle of dinner one night, and he was just like him. He was this beautiful blonde man, very Norwegian, and And I thought he was, cool Norwegian. They're all very nice. Norwegian people are very nice. And he was there for about half an hour, and he started talking about his boyfriend. And I suddenly became so ashamed because I had this wave of shame over me because here was, and I became intimidated by him because he was blonde and handsome and seemed straight and was like perfect. And then when he was also gay, I felt this intense shame and like envy, I guess, that he could be that and he wasn't, that I can't just I can't join a table and surprise someone by telling them I'm gay. And that, when that hit me, it was a big eye-opener for me. And this only happened like a year ago. This shame that I still carry about that. And I think that's the thing that I've most cherished about being Arnold is that he has taught me to overcome that, to strip that away, to redirect those feelings into other feelings. And he's a really great person to be. He's a really great. It's a great skin to wear. Sometimes sometimes you play a character and you're fine to get rid of them at the end of the night. You think I don't need to be that person all day, or they show up around 5 p.m. and you're like, oh, look who's here. But Arnold, I mean, he can come anywhere with me. He makes me better, I would say.
Where do you redirect the shame?
Into love. I think into love. I mean, that's what the play does. The play is people who ram into each other in order to hold on to each other. The fights that Ma and Arnold have are they're trying to hug each other, but they just can't. And I think that's how you beat it, I guess, is you beat the. I had an acting teacher once say there's only 2 feelings, love and fear, and really just love.
That's it.
There's an interesting thing with Arnold where through the whole evening he seems so strong and he seems so, but the mother beats him down so badly and undercuts everything that he believes. I mean, she practically says to him, you couldn't possibly have loved this boy. You couldn't have loved another person. And if I'd known you were gay, I wouldn't have bothered having you. He's so wrecked that his real shame comes out. And it comes out in the very beautiful scene with Ed in bed when Ed's begging him to give them a chance. And he says, I'm not Laurel. I can't give you a home and a child and you've got it all. I don't know the words. He could do this. But he says I can't give you any of that stuff, and it always shocks me watching him do that. It shocks me, like I forget that is still in him, that self-loathing is there right under the surface. For all that bravado and stuff, he still feels I can't possibly make you happy.
There's this part in the play where Ma has just arrived, and I say, look, you haven't seen, I'm showing her around the apartment. I say, look at this Afghan I made, and she clearly doesn't like it, and I think clearly doesn't like it because I've made it, doesn't like that I've made it. And in that scene, in that moment, there's a part where he says, Ed says, I want another chance with you, and I say, I can't, and I turn back on him and I say, you think you could bring your friends here? And I always had this impulse, the whole time we did it off Broadway and for several weeks on Broadway, I just wanted to say, I wanted to somehow show him that this is a gay apartment. And you can't even tell your friends that you date women, and you're gonna bring them to this gay apartment covered in bunnies and with ballet dancers. And I was always like, I just wanna hold something really gay. I just want to point at something really gay, and I could never figure it out. And finally, I realized I'm literally sitting on the Afghan. So now I just hold it up right in front of me.
Really do.
Yeah. Yeah, you haven't seen it.
I haven't seen that
I haven't
either.
seen you do that.
And the audience, like, they laugh. And the first time that I mean, and I think, when I found it, it was one of the best discoveries I've ever found. I mean, it won't work tomorrow, but I don't care.
Live theater.
But it was one of the, I was like, this is what I've been looking for, and it was literally under my ass. And people laugh, and I think they get it. And they're laughing, but they're laughing because they get it. I mean.
But what is it? But what is it when you tell Ed that when Ed says I want another chance with you and you tell him I can't make you happy? I mean, does that tap into that stuff you were talking about before?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all that. It's I'm this. I'm an Afghan. I can never be your husband. And I can never give you what you. It happens in the second play too. When he's flirting with me in the bed, in the big bed scene, when he's flirting with me, I ask him, are you and Laurel having kids yet? Are you working on having kids yet? And he says, no. And I'm like, I thought that's why you were with her. It's such a puzzlement because that was the problem, wasn't it? Wasn't the problem that I couldn't give you those things? And it continues there. And even though Ed really seems ready at that point, it's like they've just.
So how do you get to that last moment of? I'm asking the questions now.
Take it.
But how do you get to that moment where he's about to leave and she's still standing there, and you say what we talked about before? I don't know.
It happens in the way. I mean, I go off and I think about it. Think about what's just happened. Just like what David says. David says, Arnold, you'll ask Arnold something and he'll say no, and then 5 seconds later he'll change his mind entirely. And I think that that's exactly right. David is the smartest character of the play, and I think he knows that that's true. But I also, and there's these wonderful moments that happen in the last very sleepy, quiet scene where she comes in taking care of the son, and Ed says, I'll take you to breakfast, and he's cleaning up, and it's family. We're playing. We're back to playing house together. And Ma's taking care of grandson, and Ed's, and she's saying things that are not appropriate to Ed, but they're respectful of each other, and it feels, it's a sort of that's sort of, for me, it builds on all those things, and then I think, let's give it a shot.
You know where it is? I'll give you a hint. We never talked about this. I know we never talked about this. It's in the song dedicated on the radio. And he turns to David and says, did I ever tell you that Alan played a song for me on the radio, but they read it to Ellen to Arnold and that's where it happens.
That's where it happens with Ed.
Yeah. That's when he realizes the name is wrong, but the emotion's not.
I'll put it in tomorrow.
I feel
There's
we've
a
had
lot
a
in that
breakthrough.
scene. A lot of shit in that scene.
So much in that scene.
Well, look at the two of them. I mean, you have a mother and son who cannot relate to each other as a mother and son. They just are going to kill each other. But as two widows.
That's why I asked the widow question.
Well, we know that. You're very smart.
And when she says, take care of, she says, answer the phone, it might be something with that son of yours, when she acknowledges that he's my son. Oh, that gets me every night. Mm-hmm. Every night.
I want to, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, and I also acknowledge that you're in mourning.
Yeah.
And that it's going to take time, and hang in there. And essentially, the memory of your beloved will never go away, and you don't want it to. And so she actually acknowledges that your relationship with this lover who has died was a real one, and one that has thrown you into real grief, and one that she can comfort you about. So there is a breakthrough there. But I just wanted to say something about what you were saying about love. I had this great acting teacher. His name was Tad Danielewski. We were working on a scene once, and he very rarely pulled his chair around to talk to the whole class, but this time he did, and he said, what's the oldest definition of theater? And somebody finally came up with the actor, the boards, and the passion. And then he said, what's passion? And everybody was saying, well, it's the fear, it's anger, it's vengeance, it's, you know, think about all the tragedies that you've ever seen. And somebody said, and it's love, and he said, wait, whoever said it's love, put your hand up, and somebody did. He said, I put it to you that there is only one passion in the world, and it's love. Everything else, the fear, the need for vendetta, the self-loathing, everything that is love on its way to its object, hitting an obstacle and not being able to reach its object. But he said, without love, there is no hatred, there is no vengeance, none of that can exist without love. That's the primal passion. And all of the others are contained in it, in the negative form. So that even the mother, when and she does say some horrible things to her son, and finally she gets so frustrated that she says, believe me, if I'd known you were going to be gay, I wouldn't have bothered having you. And the audience, you can hear them go, oh, like that then. And I think, boy, I hope nobody has a gun. That'd be one of those moments. And I can tell you, in a weird way, I mean, I have to use a substitution. It's kind of like doing The Goat on Broadway, where your husband falls in love with a goat. Now I have a son who's in love with another man. But you have to use a substitution for these things, too, because I don't feel this way, and we don't feel this way at all, you know, anymore. But when she says it, there's a weird kind of fierce thing to it that it's just manna to an actor. I wish I'd never bothered. And I have an immediate, and I have to use it very, very quickly and sparely, adjustment of somebody I'm talking to who is very real in my past. And I can't be thinking of him all through the scene, but when that line comes out, I pung it at him, you know? And it hasn't not worked yet. I mean, there are nights when I'm madder at her than others, but
Are you
this
going
thing
to tell us who it is?
To the grave with me. I mean, but that's what I mean. There is the negative aspect of love is so fierce, but it's love that's at the bottom that lights the fuse of. If I'd known, I wouldn't have bothered. Even that emotion has no place in the world without love. You know? So I find that fascinating, and I find this character has a really high yield that I didn't realize was there in the beginning. I mean, Ma. I mean, I am still finding nuance. I'm still hearing things that I didn't hear the first time. For instance, I go out with this, you know, the boy that he is trying to adopt now, who's a foster child, and we go out for a long walk, and we come back and we're laughing. We've obviously bonded, but it only occurred to me a couple of weeks ago that he told me, because I then relay it back later in the play, that this boy told me he loves you. So I thought, oh, wait a minute, that conversation I had with that boy got very deep. We got into the real stuff. And so now, I don't have that much more to say to him on stage, but when I look at him, when he looks at me, when we have a few words, I know it's coming out of a bond that we created on that walk that we took. And there's a little clue there that I hadn't realized, that he told me, you know, that he loved. So, and I'm still finding nuance, and I'm still finding. And
he lies to you too.
Oh yeah.
But to make himself look good in your eyes, he tells you that his parents, what is he? What's the lie?
he said I'm an orphan.
Yeah, that he's an orphan.
Yes, he dramatizes himself.
He doesn't want to admit that he comes from a horrible home.
Yeah.
That he's been through 4 other foster homes. He tells her he's an orphan. I mean, it's kind of really dear that he does that with you.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's just nuanced the relationship into a slightly different place. And that's the fun of doing a show 8 times a week. You know, you find these arrowheads in the furrow sometimes that you didn't know were there. And you've done 150 performances, and bingo, one shoots up.
Wait till we put all this stuff back in that we cut out.
Yeah, right.
I love the phrase that you just used to identify that high yield.
Yeah.
It's a high yield part.
Yeah, yeah. And I wouldn't have guessed it the first time we did the first table read. I thought she was good. I thought she was funny. I thought she, it was complicated. But I didn't realize I'd still be finding things like on the 60th performance. So that's been a real pleasure. And,
well done,
and a
Harvey.
continuing pleasure.
Well, I think you know this story. From all the years that we did the play, and it's 40 years, my brother would come, and he's like
yeah,
number
this
one
story
fan.
is
He'd
good.
come see all the shows. They know this story.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of interviews, and if anybody ever read anything about the plays, they know that when they ask me, "Is that your mother?" and I say, "No, that's not my mother. That's my mother and my grandmother," because they really did fight. The two of them would fought. My grandmother was the youngest of 8 children. She had 7 brothers, so she fought for every piece of food in that house, and she fought with my mother. And for all these years we've done, and my mother used to come all the time to the theater and see the show, and it's 40 years. So my brother and I are sitting in the back of the house at second stage, like second or third preview, and he's very quiet through the whole third play. And the curtain comes down, the audience stands up, they're screaming and they're applauding, and he's still sitting there quietly, and he doesn't look at me, and he just says, "That was Mom, wasn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "She really said all of that, didn't she?" And I said, "Yeah." And we never discussed it again.
But he had thought it was the grandmother. You had told him previously
he took that
it was the
excuse and
grandmother.
never realized that a lot of that stuff actually had happened.
Didn't you say, didn't when your mom first saw it, didn't she say that?
No, they told us not to get scared, so he was if she came out here, so he was helping. He was playing the scene.
It's a little scary.
Didn't when your mom see the show for the first time, didn't she say, "That's my mother"?
No, I always told her that.
You told her. You said.
Well, I sort of. She knew Estelle Getty, who was Estelle Gettelman then, and I told her I was writing a role for Estelle Gettelman, because Estelle was like a big fan of mine, so I wrote this role for her, and so it was all in there. It was all. Stuff was happening, real life stuff was, yes, it was all in there. No, but I think you're thinking of the story when my mother brought my grandmother to see the show. So she didn't bring it to the first act. We skipped the backroom scene, Stephen. There was no backroom scene, Stephen. And we skipped, and so the second act ends, when the 4 of them are all in bed together. The lights come up, and my grandmother turns to my mother and goes, "He's a homosexual." And my mother goes, "Do I sleep with him?"
But wait, so your mother didn't recognize any of the things that she had said that you had put in? No.
We never discussed it.
What'd she say to you after she saw it the first time?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, that's really a long time. But, we're talking about a little theater, La Mama with 60 seats
And your mother.
And your mother, and yeah, so I don't really know. I remember what Ellen said. Ellen Stewart was La Mama. So she was my other mother I had.
What'd
the
she
real
say?
mother and I had. She said, "I got that baby. I got that baby. I got that." Well, she made me take out. She made sure that Arnold was only in drag in the very first scene. Because she said she really believed in me. I mean, I was a kid. I started La Mama when I was 15 years old. I was a kid, and she used to say, "My baby ain't wearing bloomers no more." Mm-hmm. Is the way she put it. She wanted me out of drag, and she would. And I used to take drag roles all the time, and she would get angry, and she wanted me out of drag. I did a one-man show there once, and she came to my dressing room every night before the show to wash my face, to make sure I was wearing no makeup, even if I was a guy, men's makeup, she would not allow it.
Because she
She believed in me. She believed that I had this career and that I wasn't. She used to say, I watch the others, and this is fine for them. I don't want you here.
What did drag mean for her?
Drag was a disguise. It was a hiding, and it was a gimmick.
Is that what it is to you?
Hiding, definitely. I mean, Arnold, of course. Look how brave Arnold is in that first scene. Then all of a sudden you realize he's a scared little thing. You know, he's giving everybody advice, sitting there in drag, telling everybody what to do. And, oh, I got to tell you about this. I got to tell you about that. You don't know shit. But, you know, in drag, he's very strong. So, yeah. But Ellen, I mean, it's just who she was. And it was our relationship. But, yeah. So I wasn't.
I want to dig in a bit back to what Michael was talking about who we are and where we find our shame and why it is. Harvey, I want to read something that you said brilliantly, I think. The gay child has to examine the entire world to see how he doesn't fit in. And once he's placed himself in that hostile world, he's achieved the gay sensibility. It's a humor based on seeing the opposite, which is also very Jewish. So I would say that if anyone is fluent in gay and Jewish humor, it's you. And certainly Arnold is too. But now, not all people who qualify as others in a hostile world find their armor in humor. So why the gays and the Jews?
You know, you look at African American community finding, you know, music and rap and all that, and so much is in there. But also, I love African American comedians. They dig right to, you know, it's being able to dig right to the core of the impossible situation. But of course, the gay person always, the word I use, opposite. It's just opposite. I don't know. And the Jew is, you know, I think of that terrible joke that the old man's walking down the road with a chicken under his arm, and a Nazi stops him and says, "Hey, you taking that chicken?" He says, "I'm taking it to the market to get it some food." "What are you gonna feed that chicken?" says the Nazi. I don't know. I thought a little grain. "Grain," he says, and he beats the Jew up. So the Jew picks himself up. He picks up the chicken. He starts down the road again. He runs into another Nazi. "Where you going with that chicken?" says the Nazi. "I'm taking him to the market to get him some food." "What are you going to feed that chicken?" says the Nazi. "I thought maybe some oats." "Oats," says the Nazi. "While there's Germans starving, you're going to feed them oats." And he beats the old man up, and he knocks the chicken to the ground and leaves him there. And the Jew gets the chicken under his arm. He starts down the road again when he runs into another Nazi. "Where you taking that chicken?" says the Nazi. "To the market to get him some food." "What are you going to feed that chicken?" says the Nazi. "I don't know. I'll give him a couple of bucks. He'll get what he wants." That's Jewish and that's gay. It's looking at it, you know, it's that other, take the other road.
In the play, there's when the kid finally confronts me after I've lied about him to my mother, and he says, "I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to let you use me to you know, feel sorry for yourself." And I say, "I'm nothing like my mother." And he says, "Oh, really? What would you do if I came home with a girl and told you I was straight?" And I say, "If you were happy, I'd be happy." But I was saying, if you were happy, then I'd be happy for you. And Harvey said, "That's not the right line." and explain why.
No, you do it very well. Go ahead.
Well, he said that he said, "If you were happy, then I'd be happy for you," is what a normal person would say. But "if you were happy, then I'd be happy" puts the blame on you. But it puts the onus on you to be happy before I can even think about being happy. It feels very gay and Jewish.
You're a parent, you know that.
I was just going to say, that's parenthood. It's also gay parenthood and Jew parenthood and gay Jew parenthood.
And what you going to get that chicken, says the Nazi.
You know, Mercedes, I was thinking about speaking of parenthood, about Lost in Yonkers, which I loved, and I loved you in.
Thank you.
And you know, the relationship between Bella and her mother, and Arnold and his, feels like it is in conversation in some way, right? Both of the adult children want a life that is somewhat traditional, and certainly urgently about love, to what you said earlier. And both of their mothers feel that they are somehow, for different reasons, not worthy of that life. And I wondered if Bella, being on the other side of that fight, if your experience with Bella came into your thinking as you were figuring out Ma.
Actually, I would have to say no.
Moving on.
But the mother in Lost in Yonkers is fierce and unable to, in a way, from her experiences in life, which we can assume were the Holocaust and that she escaped, but not without tremendous wounds. And it's very difficult for her to give love, to show love. Almost impossible. The mother in Torch Song really is much more available to the idea of love. But she's got a very big obstacle there. She feels that her son's homosexuality is morally wrong. And perhaps, I don't know what people felt back in the day, maybe even a form of decadence. And it certainly goes against any religious principles that she, you know. I mean, that period of time, I'm looking at, probably some of you have been watching the funeral and all the ritual around the death of Bush Sr. But I remember back to that time, and he was president when the AIDS epidemic broke out. And he handled it very, very delicately, because one had a sense from him that he wasn't sure what side of the moral position he should be on. In terms of homosexuality, clearly was not a settled idea in his mind. And this would have been around the same time you wrote that play. So
It was already done. It was well done.
In the 80s.
We were well done. Well, these plays were well done. I mean, we were at.
I'm saying this would have been around 82, 81, 82, maybe 70, and the play was still pretty fresh. I mean, it was on Broadway in 80.
Yeah, but so, we were performing at the Actors Playhouse when Ned Levy, the pianist, came with the first article that talked about this strange thing going on in San Francisco. And Court Miller, who was playing Ed opposite me, it was a joke. He used to come in with, he had a rash this day, the next day he had something else. We thought he was the worst hypochondriac we ever knew. And the guy who had played the role before at the Richard Allen Center, Joel Crothers, left the show because he believed he had picked up a bug of some kind on a trip to Africa the summer before, and he said, he was a star of a soap opera, and he said, I've got to get well, so I can't go with the show Off Broadway. So we were in the midst of doing this show when all of that was
starting to manifest.
But our anger at George Bush is our anger at Reagan and Bush. I mean, Reagan made a decision. They had gay friends, you know, Nancy. Yeah. Her name was Nancy. And they had gay friends. And the decision was, they went to him and said, this is not curable, so do not mention it. It is a losing political battle. So Reagan never did. And then Bush took the same thing. There was a real choice on their part to say nothing and to let us die.
That's what I'm saying.
They let us die.
And so there's all this glory around Bush right now, and everybody, what a wonderful man he was, and how humble he was, and all this stuff.
Some people, not from my community.
But the man who designed my wig came in.
Oh.
And he said, he's no hero to me. Mm-hmm. And he reminded me about Bush just sideswiping the whole AIDS epidemic and clearly making it very, very subtly. It had moral issues that troubled him.
It's killing all the right people.
So it was during that time that this mother emerges in the play, you know? And so she had a Bush-like attitude towards homosexuality, and she wasn't sure about how to define it morally. Where did it sit with her
But why
morally?
she at her gay son's house instead of her straight son's house?
Because she adores him.
That's the.
And that's what
important
sustains this
too.
mother in the play, because they say, Joanne, she's such a monster. She's a monster who adores him just the same. Adores him. But that was a very difficult time, and it did involve. You were afraid your son would never obviously marry, have a family, have children, would always be a social pariah. But maybe first of all, he chose it. It wasn't something that he was born with, or she, you know. So it was a choice. It was a choice for a certain kind of decadent life and behavior, I think a lot. And so, if that is your actual belief, the mother, what do you do with that? Because this critter is somebody you love more than anyone else on earth at the same time. So she really does have kind of a dilemma. And what I keep finding is the places where her love comes out in spite of herself. Those are the nuggets I've been finding. And they're there. They're all there. I believe that every writer, the great ones from Euripides to Shakespeare to you, write more than they realize.
But the thing is, one of the thoughts that's not expressed in Torch Song at all, that I don't know whether people still think of it. Back then, you didn't have to say it. You knew the mother was suffering with it. Is that it's the mother's fault that he's gay?
Yeah, there's that. Okay, so I have a gay uncle, and he was the youngest of 6 very, very Catholic children of a very, very Irish Catholic cop and his Irish Catholic Kathleen Tobin wife. And my poor Uncle Eugene was the youngest, and I have to say the handsomest, and the mother adored him. They gave him a hard time. All the brothers, the sisters too, the parents did. They gave him a hard time, except the mother did adore him, really did adore him. And then I remember hearing my father opine, even as a child, that maybe it was because he didn't have the mother's love the way my younger Uncle Eugene had it, that it was his mother's doing. So you're absolutely right. That was a very common thing.
It was a common thing that you didn't have to write down then. And I sort of wonder whether... I would never add lines to the play. I added a couple of lines when I wrote the movie. The line that you say to him before you walk out the door. You cut me out of your life, and then blame me for not being there. That's from the movie. That's not from the original.
Yeah,
right?
well, I'm glad you put it in.
Yeah, me too.
Because a lot of people come back to me
they
with
say
that
that.
line, and they say that's the one that was the stake that got into my heart.
But I wouldn't add something like that. But it is in my mind, like, do audiences understand how much the mothers took blame for having gay children?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, as we're talking about AIDS, which is, it's not in the play because it is just a couple of years off. And, you know, it's hard sometimes to watch the play without thinking about what is going to happen to these men that we're coming to know and love. And I'm curious how you put that aside on stage and then process it off stage for both of you.
Right, are you talking about the actors or the... Well, the good thing about being the actor is you don't see it coming. You don't know it's coming. So, or the character. But yeah, I've thought about how you wrote this, just on the edge of the diving board of that grief-filled decade that came in, even before this show left the stage. I mean, I'm sure you remember, at that time, and anybody who was old enough to be a matriculating adult, or anyway, supposedly one, chronologically, in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, I was telling the driver, I'd lost, over that period, 13 friends. And there was almost a point where you couldn't process it anymore. You couldn't process the grief anymore. Because at that time, as you remember well, AIDS went through it quickly, but it went through several different stages. And the last one was dementia. And to see young friends, bright, lambent minds, you know, just dissolve. It was unbearable. So the characters don't know, obviously, what's coming down the pike, but yeah, we actors, I mean, I think it's...
Well, the whole cast, the whole original cast of Torch Song, except for me and Matthew, are dead.
No kidding.
Yeah. Cord and the pianist and the boy who played Alan and just me and the kid.
Yeah, well...
And not just us, not just that cast, but the understudies have died and the other performers.
Yeah.
Even the girl who played Laurel died of breast cancer.
Shit. Wow.
You just...
Are we gonna be okay?
Like hers?
Does it ever enter your mind is what Jordan asked you answer his question?
I feel the same way. It's funny, you know, people mention AIDS all the time when they see the play, and you know, they still think in the third play, when you find out that Alan has died between the second and third play, and you don't find out how until late in the play, people still jump to that conclusion, even though it says on the set, 1981. It's very clear, and I think that that's intentional. David Zinn put that on our set so that people would know that this is not this story does not include the plague, because it was pre that. But I think people still do. People still jump to that conclusion. People still assume it, and I mean that's just, I think that's history. That's part of it. That's ingrained in our history. But I'm with Mercedes. It's funny. I think about what happens before the play, but I don't think much about what happens after the play. And most of the thoughts are happy ones anyway. When I think, oh well, David will grow up and be a wonderful man, but you know, something terrible could happen. Yeah, but
you can't do that. You can't do that. You know, Medea. He just did Hamlet. I've played Medea. You can think about what happens when the curtain goes down to those characters. You'll lose your mind.
Well, nothing happens for those characters. They're all dead on the floor.
And I played Medea in The Laundromat. H.M. Katukas wrote it for me. I stood.
Wait, for real?
We performed it. Yeah, we performed it in the Laundromat on Christopher Street.
Oh, I love it.
And when Jason said he was leaving me, as he went to the door, I'd put the kids in the washer. And I said, Jason, give me a quarter. That's classic. There's your classic theater.
is that at Lincoln Center Library?
You know what? I think that is the perfect segue to our audience questions, because the first one
If you want to do
is,
Shakespeare, you should do that instead.
is there anything about gay life in the 70s and 80s you miss? And I ask that because possibly you missed doing Medea in a laundromat.
Well,
I wish I would have
but
seen
that's
you.
anybody's childhood. You miss the innocence. Of course, you miss the innocence of those times. I mean, they were exciting times. I was going to Pratt full time. I was a painting student, and doing. You know, I would do the 8 o'clock show at La Mama, the 10 o'clock show at Theater Genesis, the midnight show at St. Clement's, rehearse a couple of other plays during the day. I mean, all this stuff going on. You know, I only started writing because somebody said, you know, these plays you're in aren't so good. Why don't you write a play? Okay. You know, I mean, so it's an exciting time, but that's anybody's childhood, right? I mean, but it wasn't age. I mean, how we lived through it. Forget AIDS, just the muggings on the street, what the Bowery was like back in those days.
It was a much more dangerous city back then.
Yeah.
When did
But
you
do
come to
you know how long this one and I, we actually didn't know each other, but when we were doing the original casting for Torch Song, we did it in a theater where the Glines was producing a play called The Last Summer at Bluefish Cove by Jane Chambers. And this one was the understudy there.
No.
And the guy in the play from Texas, he and I became lovers. He's the one I thanked on the Jodies, Scott Sparks.
Who was in the play that Mercedes
Who was in the play that Mercedes was the understudy for.
It was on 50th and 10th, right? The lines?
Yeah,
somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there.
And so I understudied.
Storefront theater.
I understudied for about 2 weeks because then I had to leave because I went to do Medea. So, but at that time I would come to the theater and I'd had to watch it. You know, the first few weeks that you're understudying, you have to watch the show every night. So I'd get there about an hour early. And there was a little bar. Hell's Kitchen finally had a few little bars, you know, that were starting to look a little, the beginning of gentrification back then. And there was a very friendly bartender who always went around on roller skates, and I'd sit at the bar and we'd talk, and I'd have a little quiche and a glass of wine before I head over. And
Sure.
That began the relationship with Bruce Willis, who was the bartender. So a lot of things happened to us at that time. Yes, yes, and we were just misbehaving all over the place.
We knew where that was going.
I did not know it. Did anybody see that coming? I mean, the stories that are being dropped at the Buttonwise are extraordinary. Mark would like to know, Harvey, I really enjoyed your performance in Gently Down the Stream. Have you ever considered exploring an aging Arnold and how his life has evolved since Torch Song? That connects to what we were talking about. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, we've discussed it, and I don't know. You know, because I don't know. I mean, I think I don't want it to be a sentimental, you know, walk down. I mean, I love the characters just as they are, and yeah, so I don't know. But I mean, obviously people have asked me for years, and when I get, maybe one day I'll be ready and I will write that. I don't know.
I'll be watching. I'll be watching.
Okay.
Here's a good question. Watching the fight between Arnold and his mother reminds me so much of the arguments I still have with my mother about being gay. I am not willing to cut my parents out of my life. How would you have acted and written this differently to keep his mother in his life?
I don't think she leaves for good. She walks out the door, but she throws a couple of breadcrumbs for him to pick up and follow her path. And one of them is she gives him genuine comfort for what she has finally grokked is real grief and loss. And that's something. That's a big step for her. And the next thing she says as she walks out is, get the phone. It might be something with that son of yours. She is now calling him his son. So I think she's given a couple of little clues that Mom might be back. Yeah. I think this particular chapter is best over right now. Back to Florida with her. But I don't think it's the end of their relationship.
And before that happens, Arnold says, "You can stay," and is interrupted. And I think he's going to say, "You can stay on condition," and then he's willing to, now that they have slept and they are you know, I mean, he didn't sleep, but now that they have you know, calmed down, let's discuss this. And if you can't come to, and I think at the end of what she says, when she says answer the phone, it might be something with that son of yours. I think Arnold assumes she will stay, and that they have taken a large step. But in terms of preventing any of that, you know, which is or fixing any of that, which I guess is what the question was sort of asking. I don't know. I always think every night when the kid starts reading the Oscar Wilde book, and I start quoting it, and then I decide to teach him about it, that if I just didn't do that, we might have a happy ending, because that's what changes and in rehearsal we would always get to that point. I'd always say, let's just stop. Let's stop here. Everything's going so well. She's making latkes. Let's just stop. Let's just stop here. But of course, that's that's not right, and that's not Arnold. It would have come out one way or the other. You know, Arnold would have, if he didn't step in it there, he would step in it later on purpose. And
I used to think, I mean, the answer for me was, she leaves so she can come back, which is what you said. And we didn't really have to discuss it or decide until we made the movie. Because he looks out the window and we don't know whether he sees her or not. In the original, even La Mama production, the window was down at the apron of the stage. So I looked out at the audience and you never knew whether he saw her or not. But movies, you see everything. If you don't see it, you know it's a cheat. And so we sat and discussed, and we finally decided he'd look out the window and see her just getting into the cab, and she sort of waves like, it's okay, and gets in, you know. But that was...
You know, in rehearsal at one point, Moises, because I look out the window, and at one point Moises said, and then I think that you wave at her. And I said, no. He goes, no, okay.
You do a wonderful Argentinian accent.
He's Venezuelan.
Oh, you
That too. What do you see as the impact the play has on the new LGBT generation?
You know those children, tell them.
The thing that when it was first, you know, put out there that I was doing it and we were first doing it, the thing that kept moving me the most were the people who said Arnold was the first man I ever fell in love with, or Arnold is the first gay man I ever saw or met, or I saw it in my town when it was on tour and it changed my life, or you know, my mother brought me and people were leaving the theater but we stayed, and I hear that from young people today. I mean, you know, we sign autographs for people after the show, and they say, I had that conversation with my mother. Young people, and somebody reached out to us and said, this play gave me today, you know, last week, this play gave me the courage to come out to my Mrs. Beckoff, who was my grandmother. And for anyone who admits that to us, there must be others who can't or don't. And you know, I think it's the courage, the same courage that he gives me, he must give people out there in the dark every night.
Well, you talked about still feeling sometimes a ping of shame.
Yeah.
And maybe you're ashamed of the shame, but
Sure.
you still feel it.
Yeah.
You still feel it. I think women, we like to think we're absolutely equal in our society, and but look at what this Me Too movement has opened up. I think women still struggle, I know I do, with the ingrained sense that I am good as a man in everything but not. You know? I still haven't totally shrugged off the second sex thing. I mean, if I were to go into a room with a lot of very learned men, and I would be the only woman, and I would be scared. I would be scared that I wouldn't measure up to their masculine, intellectual, you know, sort of barrage. It would scare the hell out of me. I think it's still, there are aspects of shame to any group that considers itself a minority of some kind, not women necessarily, but they are a second sex still. But I think there is a shame attached to being African American, that no matter how proud you are, there's something just like you. There's a hintikadanka in the back of your brain, a tiny little speck that says, you are not equal, you have never been equal. I think it happens among the Jewish population. You know, the founding of Israel did not wash away hundreds of years of prejudice, thousands of years of prejudice. And so we all fight these fights, and we all, I think most, I bet most of the men who come to the play still have this little part of themselves that has shame, and that's the last part to go, you know? It certainly, I think it's true of women. And I remember my brother and sister-in-law, who were both journalists, saying about 15 years ago, well, men and women are totally equal now, and we know that. And I said, no, we're not. We don't know that yet. And today I still feel we don't quite know that yet, or this Me Too movement wouldn't have gone off like a Roman candle, you know? So, yeah, so the men who come back, the women who come back, the people who come back, they still feel very much, very deeply the emotions that are felt by the actors in the play.
Theater does that, you know. I went to see Kinky Boots on Tuesday night, and I had forgotten what that show does for straight men in the audience, because there's not that much discussion about men and their fathers, and these guys grow up and always feel that they didn't exactly turn out the way their father wanted them to be, and this, you know, and that's what that show is about, and there's very few, especially Broadway musicals about that, and I just watching straight men in the audience crying was wonderful to watch. It was wonderful to see.
Right.
To
Let them
that-
cry for a change.
To that, we will end with this not question. Harvey, you're wrong. My friends and I sat proudly in 1982 that you represented us.
Bingo.
In matters of taste, there is none.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you. That was nice.
Thank you, Jordan. Wonderful.